After everything I had survived, 63 years of learning what love costs and what it costs to lose it, I told myself I was finished. Not bitter, not closed, just finished with the kind of hoping that leaves you hollow. Then a man came into my life who seemed to already know the woman the years had made me. Not the younger version, this version. The one with the silver hair and the careful walk and the eyes that had stopped expecting miracles. He saw her, and within a season, I had given him what I had spent a decade protecting: my trust, my door, my name on his paperwork, and I was so certain I had finally gotten it right. I was so certain I was too old to be foolish. What I didn't understand then was that wisdom doesn't protect you from someone who has studied exactly.
I was 61 years old when my husband of 34 years looked me in the eye across our kitchen table, the same table where we had eaten 10,000 meals, argued, laughed, grown silent with one another, and told me he had been living a second life. Not a dramatic confession, no trembling voice. He said it the way a man announces he is changing insurance companies. I remember the sound of the refrigerator humming. I remember the way the afternoon light fell across his hands. I remember thinking, this cannot be the last ordinary moment of my life. But it was. Everything before that afternoon became a different country, one I would never be permitted to return to. The divorce took 11 months. The grief took something I still haven't fully measured. What nobody tells you about ending a long marriage is that it isn't just the man you lose. You lose the version of yourself that existed inside the marriage. The woman who cooked for two, who slept on one side of the bed out of habit, who still had someone to call when something small and funny happened during the day. That woman had no forwarding address. I moved into a smaller place. My sister called on Sundays. Friends appeared in the early weeks with food and good intentions, then slowly, understandably, returned to their own lives. And I learned, quickly, ruthlessly, what a particular kind of silence sounds like. Not peaceful silence, not chosen silence. The silence of a life that had been built for two and was now being occupied by one. I was not depressed exactly. I was erased. And an erased woman, I would later understand, is exactly the kind of woman certain men know how to find. If that sentence just landed somewhere in your chest, subscribe. This story was written for you with pain. There is a particular kind of loneliness that a woman learns to wear like a second skin. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that announces itself with tears at the dinner table or confessions to close friends. The quiet kind. The kind you learn to manage so well that even you stop noticing how heavy it has become. My husband left me for a woman 31 years younger than him. 31 years. She was the age of the daughter we never had. Smooth-skinned and unhurried, still assembling her life from scratch. And somewhere in that newness, my husband of 22 years found a reflection of the man he wanted to believe he still was. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I simply released him. And then I was alone in a house that remembered everything. The silence was the worst of it. Not grief exactly. Grief has a shape, a direction. This was something flatter. I still set 2 cups out in the morning without thinking. Still turned to say small things. Ordinary things, and found only air where a person used to be. I was 61 years old, and I could not explain to anyone that what I missed most wasn't romance. It was presence. The warmth of another body moving through the same rooms. Someone who knew which drawer held the batteries. Someone who simply remembered. That kind of loneliness doesn't ask for very much, which is exactly what makes it so terribly easy to exploit. His name was Roland, and he didn't arrive the way danger usually does. Loud, obvious, easy to step back from. He arrived quietly, the way relief does. We met at a church fundraiser of all places. He was helping fold programs near the entrance, sleeves rolled to the elbow, laughing at something the pastor had said. There was an ease about him that I hadn't seen in a man in a long time. Not performance. Not the rehearsed confidence of someone trying to impress. Just presence. He noticed me before I noticed him noticing. That should have told me something. He found small reasons to be near me that evening. Refilled my cup before I asked. Remembered my name the second time he used it. The way people only do when they've been paying attention since the first. On the drive home, I caught myself smiling at nothing in particular, and I didn't know what to do with that feeling. It had been so long since something had stirred it. He called 3 days later, said he hadn't stopped thinking about the woman by the window with the quiet laugh. I was 63 years old. I had buried a marriage and built something small but steady out of what remained. I knew better. I told myself I knew better. But there is a particular hunger that outlasts wisdom, the need to be seen by someone who chose to look. And Roland looked. He proposed on a Tuesday. Not with grand theater. No restaurant. No audience. No spectacle arranged for other people's benefit. Just the two of us on my back porch as the evening settled in. Him holding my hands the way a man holds something he genuinely fears losing. Saying he didn't want to waste what little time God had been gracious enough to give them both. That was what undid me. What little time God had been gracious enough to give. A man who spoke like that, who moved through life with one eye on eternity, felt like shelter, like answered prayer. Roland quoted scripture the way some men quote the weather. Naturally, without performance, woven into the spaces between ordinary sentences. He talked about legacy, about what a man leaves behind. He would watch children playing outside church and grow quiet in a way that looked like longing, like a man carrying a tenderness he had never had the chance to spend. That kind of softness is disarming in ways that hardness never could be. He remembered how I took my tea. He remembered what I mentioned in passing about missing the sound of a full house. He showed up beside me at church like it was where he had always belonged. 'Tis greeted my friends with warmth that seemed bottomless, held doors, bowed his head in grace, sang the hymns without checking the book. What woman of faith, alone at 63, does not feel something give way at that? We married 4 months after we met. Everyone smiled at the reception. My pastor called it a blessing. My closest friend said Roland had restored something in me, and she was right. I carried myself differently. I had stopped bracing for the next blow. The tension I had worn for years across my shoulders had simply loosened. I told myself the speed was not recklessness. I told myself that at our age, certainty arrives faster because the noise of youth is finally gone. You simply know. I know now that certainty and urgency are not the same thing. I know now that a man who needs the wedding to happen quickly is a man who needs it to happen before you start asking the right questions. But I was not asking questions then. I was learning to cook for two again, and thanking God for what I was absolutely certain was mercy. I don't know exactly when the warmth left the room. It happened the way late summer fades in the South. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in a slow, quiet withdrawal. One morning you reach for the light and realize it has been thinning for weeks, and somehow you convinced yourself it was still July. The first time he picked up my phone without asking, I told myself it was curiosity. The first time he questioned where I had been, just the pharmacy, just a neighbor's porch, I told myself it was concern. I was very good at renaming things. He had a way of making his control feel like devotion. His watchfulness dressed itself as protection. His questions arrived wrapped in tenderness, so that to resist them felt ungrateful. I just worry about you, that's all. And I, who had spent so many years feeling invisible to the people who should have cherished me most, I received his surveillance like a gift. Then came the photographs. He said it was intimate, said it was only between us, said a woman my age should feel celebrated, not hidden away like something the world had already finished with. And something in me, the part still aching to be seen as desirable, still tender from years of feeling set aside, that part believed him. I stood in the pale afternoon light of our bedroom, half undressed, while he smiled behind the phone screen. I remember thinking, this is what trust looks like. I remember thinking, I am finally someone worth wanting. I did not think about where those images would go. I did not ask, because asking would have meant admitting I was afraid. And I was not ready, not yet, to let myself be afraid of him. The transfer was for $4,000. He came to me on a Thursday evening, voice low and heavy, with something that looked like shame. And Roland was not a man who wore shame easily, which was what made it so convincing. His sister, a hospital in another state, something with her heart. The kind of emergency that doesn't wait for morning, doesn't wait for questions, doesn't wait for the reasonable voice inside you that has been trying gently to get your attention for weeks. I handed him my card, not because I didn't hesitate. I did. And there was a half second where something old and careful in me surfaced. Some instinct that had survived everything and was trying one more time to be heard. But he was sitting across from me with his hands folded and his eyes glassy, and I was his wife, and wives do not interrogate grief. So I silenced the instinct, the way I had been silencing it for months. The money left my account that night. His sister, I would later learn, did not have a heart condition. His sister, I would later learn, did not live in another state. What followed was not a single blow, but a slow unraveling. He grew irritable in ways that found reasons to land on me. My questions became accusations. My tears became manipulation. And the man who had once made me feel like the most carefully considered woman in any room now spoke to me like I was a problem he had already grown tired of solving. I stopped sleeping well. I stopped eating regularly. I stopped recognizing the woman in the mirror, not because she had aged, but because she had shrunk, quietly, obediently, the way women do when fear has been in the house long enough to feel like furniture. He was gone by the time I woke up on a Thursday, not dramatically absent. The absence arrived quietly, the way he had. His side of the closet still held the ghost of his cologne. His razor was still on the bathroom shelf. For nearly an hour, I moved through the house, calling his name, checking rooms, telling myself there was an explanation, a hospital, an emergency, something that would make sense of the stillness pressing against all four walls. Then I checked the joint account. $62,400. Every cent of the mortgage fund I had spent 3 years rebuilding after the divorce. The money I had pulled from every careful corner of my retirement. The money that was supposed to finally make this house mine, truly mine, on my own terms, before age made that dream irrelevant, gone. Transferred out in 3 quiet movements across 2 days while I slept beside him. The note was on the kitchen table, folded once, my name written across it in his careful hand. I have not been honest with you. I found you the way I have found others, watching church communities, watching neighborhoods, watching for women who carry their longing quietly. And you were kind, and you were trusting, and I am not the man I allowed you to believe I was. I am sorry for what I took. I hope God grants you something real, because you deserved better than what I gave you. I hope you find love that is true. I read it 4 times. Then I sat down on the floor beside that table, the one where I had first allowed myself to believe mercy had finally come. And I stayed there until the morning light moved all the way across the kitchen. 64 years old, on the floor, alone again. Only this time, the silence had a different weight. Not the hollow silence of a marriage ending. This was the silence of a woman who had opened every locked door inside herself and watched a stranger walk out carrying everything. The photographs were only the beginning. Over the following weeks, the architecture of what Roland had built around me came into full view. Slowly, the way eyes adjust to darkness, until I could finally see the shape of the room I had been locked inside. The joint account he had suggested was nearly empty. The paperwork I had signed, paperwork I had trusted without reading, because trust felt like love, and love felt like God's answer, had transferred access to things I had spent a lifetime building quietly and alone. When I finally sat with my closest friend at her kitchen table, spreading the documents between us like evidence at a trial, she did not say, "I told you so." She held my hands and wept. That was worse. I went home that night and sat in the chair by the window where Roland used to read his Bible. The Bible was gone. Of course it was. I had not been foolish because I was old, and I had not been foolish because I was weak. I had been foolish because I was human, still hungry, still hoping, still believing that wanting to be loved was not the same as being naive. It is not. But the wanting had cost me everything. The women who loved well and lost everything didn't lose it because they were foolish. They lost it because they were human, still breathing, still hoping, still reaching toward warmth the way all living things do. So if I could sit across from you, you with your quiet house and your careful heart, here is what I would say. Speed is not certainty. When a man needs things to move fast, ask yourself what slowness might reveal. Urgency that wears the costume of devotion is still urgency. Watch what he does when you say no to something small. Control announces itself early, in whispers, long before it raises its voice. And your loneliness, your real, legitimate longing for presence, is not a flaw to be ashamed of, but it is a door. Know who you are letting through it and why. Do not let anyone make you feel that being seen requires you to surrender something sacred. Being truly chosen costs you nothing of yourself. That is how you know it is real. I was not foolish. I was hungry for what every woman deserves. I simply did not yet know the difference between a man who sees you and one who has simply learned how seeing looks. Subscribe. Leave a comment. Share this with one woman who needs to hear it. Because some stories don't just deserve to be heard. They deserve to be passed forward, like a warning whispered between women who refuse to let the next one fall alone. And if this story stirred something deeper in you, if you are somewhere in the middle of your own quiet rebuilding, I wrote something just for you. My ebook on healing after divorce is waiting in the description below, because some journeys need more than a story. They need a guide. Download it, sit with it, and know that the woman you are becoming on the other side of the pain is worth every difficult step it takes to find her.